The oil lamp flickered in Sam McCaid's weathered hand as Morrison's boots echoed down the stone steps of the root cellar. In the dim tunnel, Clara Sanders pressed close to her brother Eli, both children looking to Sam with the kind of trust that could either save lives or get them all killed. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story." "Listen carefully," Sam whispered, his voice barely audible above the approaching footsteps. "There's enough gold in these tunnels to buy half of Arizona territory. But first, we need to survive the next 10 minutes. Morrison's voice carried down from above, harsh and commanding. "Spread out when we get down there. They can't have gone far, and I want that gold secured before Cormack finds out what we've been up to." Sam's mind raced through the tunnel layout he'd observed. The main passage connected the root cellar to the well, but there were several side chambers carved into the rock, storage areas where the original Sanders family had hidden their mining operation from claim jumpers and government officials. "Eli," Sam said quietly, "take Clara to that storage room we passed, the one with all the mining equipment. Hide behind those ore carts and don't come out until I call for you." "What about you?" Eli's voice trembled with fear and determination. "I'm going to have a conversation with Mr. Morrison about the price of kidnapping children." Clara tugged on Sam's sleeve, her 8-year-old eyes wide with concern. "Mr. McCaid, there are 3 of them and only one of you. That's not fair." Sam knelt down to meet her gaze, his stern features softening slightly. "Sometimes, sweetheart, one person fighting for what's right is worth more than 3 fighting for what's wrong." The children disappeared into the shadows just as Morrison and his 2 men reached the bottom of the steps. Their lantern light danced across the tunnel walls, creating shifting patterns of light and darkness that Sam used to his advantage. "McCaid," Morrison called out, his voice echoing through the passages. "I know you're down here, and I know you've got those kids with you." Sam positioned himself in an alcove where the tunnel branched, his Colt .45 ready. The confined space would limit Morrison's men's ability to spread out, forcing them to come at him 1 or 2 at a time. "Morrison," Sam called back, "let's talk about this like civilized men." Morrison's laughter was cold and calculating. "Oh, we're past talking, cowboy. You've seen too much, and those kids know too much. But I'll make you a deal. Tell me where the main gold cache is, and I'll make it quick for all of you." "Counter offer," Sam replied, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a man who'd faced death before. "You let the children go, and I'll consider not killing all 3 of you." Big words for a man trapped underground. Morrison gestured to his men, and they began advancing down the tunnel, their weapons drawn. Sam waited until they were close enough to see the whites of their eyes, then stepped out of the alcove with his gun blazing. His first shot caught the man on Morrison's left in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his pistol clattering across the stone floor. The second shot shattered the lantern in Morrison's hand, plunging the tunnel into near-total darkness. In the chaos that followed, Sam used his knowledge of the tunnel layout to his advantage. He moved like a ghost through passages he'd memorized, striking from unexpected angles and disappearing before Morrison's men could return fire effectively. "Damn you, McCaid!" Morrison's voice was tight with frustration and growing fear. "Stand and fight like a man." "I am fighting like a man," Sam called back from somewhere in the darkness. "A man protecting children from cowards who prey on the innocent." The psychological warfare was having its effect. Sam could hear Morrison's remaining man whispering nervously about getting out of the tunnels, about how this wasn't worth dying for. But Morrison's greed overrode his common sense. "There's enough gold down here to set us up for life." Morrison snarled at his companion. "We're not leaving empty-handed." Sam used the distraction to circle around behind them. When he spoke again, his voice came from directly behind Morrison, close enough that the man could feel his breath. "You're right about one thing, Morrison. You're not leaving empty-handed." Morrison spun around, but Sam was already moving. A quick blow from his gun butt sent Morrison's weapon flying, and a follow-up punch dropped the man to his knees. The remaining gunman raised his pistol, but froze when he found himself staring down the barrel of Sam's Colt. "Drop it," Sam said simply. The gun clattered to the stone floor. Sam lit a new lamp from his supplies and surveyed his prisoners. Morrison was conscious but dazed, blood trickling from his split lip. His companion looked ready to bolt at the first opportunity. "Now then," Sam said, settling back against the tunnel wall with his gun trained on both men. "Let's have that civilized conversation. Starting with why Silas Cormack's men are stealing from their own boss." Morrison glared at him with undisguised hatred. "Go to hell, McCaid." Sam's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a new edge of menace. "I've been to hell, Morrison. Spent 3 years there during the war. But those children haven't, and I intend to keep it that way. So you're going to tell me everything I want to know, or I'm going to start getting creative with my questions." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Morrison's companion, a thin man with nervous eyes, cracked first. "We ain't stealing from Cormack," he blurted out. "We're stealing from the government." Morrison shot him a murderous look, but the damage was done. Sam leaned forward, his interest sharpened. "Explain." The nervous man's words tumbled out in a rush. "This whole operation, it ain't Cormack's. It's a government mining claim, part of some secret deal with Washington. Cormack's just the front man, taking a percentage to keep his mouth shut and provide security." Sam felt the pieces of a much larger puzzle clicking into place. "And you boys decided to skim a little off the top?" "More than a little," Morrison growled, apparently deciding that silence was no longer an option. "There's enough gold in these tunnels to fund a small army. The government's been pulling it out for months, shipping it east to pay for God knows what. We figured they wouldn't miss a few bags." "But Clara Sanders saw you," Sam said. "Kid was in the wrong place at the wrong time. We couldn't let her run back to town talking about what she'd seen." Sam's jaw tightened with controlled rage. "So you kidnapped an 8-year-old girl to cover up your theft." "Business is business," Morrison said with a shrug that made Sam want to put a bullet in him right then and there. Instead, Sam called out to the children. "Eli, Clara, you can come out now." The Sanders children emerged from their hiding place, Clara running to Sam and wrapping her small arms around his leg. Eli looked at the captured men with a mixture of fear and satisfaction. "What do we do with them?" Eli asked. Sam studied Morrison and his companion, his mind working through the implications of what he'd learned. A secret government mining operation, a corrupt land baron serving as a front man, and enough stolen gold to change the balance of power in the entire territory. "We're going to make them an offer they can't refuse," Sam said finally. "But first, we need to see exactly how much gold we're talking about." He gestured for Morrison and his man to lead the way deeper into the tunnel system. What they found in the main storage chamber made even Sam's experienced eyes widen with shock. The room was filled with bags of gold nuggets, refined gold bars, and mining equipment worth a fortune in itself. Conservative estimates put the value at more than $50,000, enough money to buy a small town, or to bring down the men who thought they could steal children and get away with it. "Morrison," Sam said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you and your friend are going to help me send a message to Silas Cormack. A message about the price of threatening children and the cost of crossing Sam McCaid." Morrison's eyes narrowed with suspicion and fear. "What kind of message?" Sam's smile was cold as winter wind. "The kind that's going to change the balance of power in Tombstone forever. And if you're very lucky, you might even live to see it." Dawn was breaking over Tombstone as Sam McCaid led his unlikely procession back into town. Morrison and his surviving companion rode ahead, their hands bound and their weapons confiscated. Behind them, Eli and Clara Sanders shared Belle's saddle. while Sam walked alongside, leading a pack mule loaded with enough gold to buy half the territory. But it wasn't the gold that had the townspeople staring as they passed. It was the sight of Jake Morrison, Silas Cormack's feared enforcer, trussed up like a Christmas turkey and looking like he'd been dragged through a thorn bush backwards. "Word's going to reach Cormack before we get to the sheriff's office," Sam observed, noting the way people were hurrying off in different directions, eager to spread the news. "Good," Eli said with grim satisfaction. Let him sweat. Sam had to admire the boy's spirit, but he also knew that a cornered animal was at its most dangerous. Cormack wouldn't take this humiliation lying down, and his response would likely be swift and brutal. Sheriff Frank Malloy was waiting on the porch of his office, his face a mixture of relief and apprehension. Behind him stood Deputy Tom Harrison, a young man whose hand rested nervously on his gun butt. "Mr. McCaid," Malloy said as they approached, "I heard gunshots from the direction of the old farm yesterday. When you didn't come back." "We found Clara," Sam said simply, helping the girl down from Belle's back. "And we found a lot more besides." Malloy's eyes widened as he took in Morrison's condition and the heavily loaded pack mule. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. What have you gotten yourself into?" "A fight that's been brewing for a long time," Sam replied. "Sheriff, I need you to lock these men up on charges of kidnapping, theft, and conspiracy. And I need you to send a message to Silas Cormack that I want to meet with him." "Meet with Cormack?" Malloy's voice cracked slightly. "Sam, the man's got an army of gunfighters. He'll kill you on sight after what you've done to Morrison." Sam's smile was grim but confident. "Not when he hears what I have to offer him." Inside the sheriff's office, Sam laid out his plan while Morrison and his companion were locked in the jail cells. The captured men listened with growing amazement as Sam explained how he intended to use their theft against their boss. "You're insane," Morrison said from behind the bars. "Cormack will never go for it." "He will when he realizes the alternative," Sam replied. "Because right now, he's got a choice. He can deal with me, or he can deal with the federal marshals I'm going to contact about this illegal mining operation." Malloy's face went pale. "Federal marshals?" "Sam, you're talking about taking on the government itself." "I'm talking about exposing corruption that goes all the way to Washington," Sam corrected. "This gold mine is being operated without proper claims, without environmental oversight, and without compensation to the original landowners. The Sanders family never sold their mineral rights. They were murdered for them." Eli looked up sharply. "Murdered? But everyone said it was an accident." "Your parents died because they discovered what was really buried on their land," Sam explained gently. "And when they tried to get help, they were silenced. But they were smart enough to leave clues. The map, the locket, the records hidden in that chest." Clara tugged on Sam's sleeve. "Does that mean the bad men who took Mama and Papa will be punished?" Sam knelt down to meet her eyes. "That's exactly what it means, sweetheart. But first, we need to make sure they can't hurt anyone else." A commotion outside interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Sam could see a group of riders approaching. Silas Cormack himself, flanked by 6 heavily armed men. The land baron was an imposing figure in his 50s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. "Looks like our invitation was accepted," Sam said, checking his weapons. Malloy stood up nervously. "Sam, maybe we should—" "Sheriff," Sam interrupted, his voice carrying absolute authority, "you're going to stay here with the children and the prisoners. Don't let anyone in or out until I get back. And if you don't come back," Sam handed Malloy a folded paper, "then you send this telegram to the federal marshal's office in Phoenix. Everything they need to know is written down." Sam stepped out onto the porch to face Silas Cormack. The land baron sat his horse like a king surveying his domain, his cold eyes taking in every detail of the scene before him. "Mr. McCaid," Cormack said, his voice cultured but carrying an undertone of menace, "I understand you've had some trouble with my employees. Your employees kidnapped a child and stole from their employer, Sam replied evenly. I'd call that more than trouble. Cormack's smile was thin and dangerous. Jake Morrison has always been enthusiastic in his duties, but kidnapping? That seems rather extreme, even for him. 8-year-old Clara Sanders would disagree. She spent 3 days tied up in those tunnels under the old farm. For just a moment, Cormack's composure slipped, and Sam saw genuine surprise in the man's eyes. Either Cormack was a better actor than most, or he really hadn't known about Clara's kidnapping. I see, Cormack said slowly. And I suppose you have proof of these allegations? I have Morrison and his accomplice in custody. I have the stolen gold. And I have something else that might interest you. Sam pulled out one of the government documents he'd found in the tunnels. An official order authorizing the mining operation and detailing the percentage that Cormack was supposed to receive. Interesting reading, Sam continued, especially the part about how you're only getting 10% of the take. While your Washington friends are getting 90% of the gold that's being pulled from land that rightfully belongs to the Sanders family. Cormack's eyes narrowed as he read the document. Where did you get this? Your boys were keeping souvenirs, along with about $50,000 worth of gold that they skimmed from the operation. The land baron's face went through several expressions before settling on cold calculation. What do you want, McCaid? I want justice for the Sanders family. I want Clara and Eli to get what's rightfully theirs. And I want you to choose which side of this fight you're really on. Explain. Sam stepped closer to Cormack's horse, his voice dropping so only the land baron could hear. Your government friends have been using you, Cormack. 10% for providing security and taking all the legal risks, while they get rich off gold stolen from murdered homesteaders. But what if there was a way to turn the tables? Cormack leaned forward in his saddle, his interest clearly piqued. I'm listening. The Sanders children are the rightful heirs to that land and everything under it. If they were to file a legal claim, with the right backing and the right evidence, your government friends would find themselves in a very uncomfortable position. And why would I help them do that? Sam's smile was sharp as a blade. Because I'm offering you a partnership instead of a war. Help me get justice for these children, and I'll make sure you get a fair share of what's rightfully theirs. Keep working for men who see you as expendable, and I'll make sure the federal marshals know exactly how deep this corruption goes. Cormack sat back in his saddle, his mind clearly working through the implications. Around him, his men waited tensely, hands near their weapons, ready for whatever their boss decided. You're asking me to betray powerful men in Washington, Cormack said finally. I'm asking you to stop being their pawn and start being your own man, Sam corrected. The question is, are you smart enough to see the difference? The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap at any moment. In the distance, Sam could see townspeople watching from windows and doorways, sensing that something momentous was happening but not understanding what. Finally, Cormack spoke. What exactly are you proposing? Sam's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The gambit was working. A meeting. Tonight. Just you, me, and the evidence that's going to change everything. But first, you're going to call off your dogs and guarantee the safety of those children. Cormack considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Very well. But McCaid, if this is some kind of trick, double quotes, no tricks, Sam assured him. Just justice. And maybe, if you're smart enough to take it, a chance at the kind of fortune that doesn't come with strings attached to Washington. As Cormack and his men rode away, Sam felt the weight of what he'd set in motion. He was gambling with the lives of 2 children and the future of an entire town. But sometimes, the biggest risks offered the greatest rewards. And Sam McCaid had never been one to back down from a fight, especially when the stakes were this high. The abandoned church on the outskirts of Tombstone had seen better days. Its wooden cross tilted at an odd angle, and most of its windows were broken. But it still provided the privacy that Sam McCaid needed for the most dangerous meeting of his life. He arrived early, as was his habit, checking every shadow and potential hiding spot. The church's interior was filled with broken pews and dust-covered religious artifacts, but it would serve his purpose. More importantly, it had multiple exits if things went wrong. Silas Cormack arrived precisely at midnight, accompanied by only 2 men instead of his usual army. Sam took this as a good sign. It suggested the land baron was at least willing to hear him out before deciding whether to kill him. "Atmospheric choice," Cormack said as he entered the church, his eyes adjusting to the dim light of Sam's single lantern. "Are you planning to offer me salvation, McCaid?" "I'm planning to offer you the truth," Sam replied. "Whether that saves you or damns you depends on what you do with it." Sam had spent the afternoon preparing for this moment, laying out documents and evidence on the church's altar like a lawyer preparing for the most important case of his career. The stolen gold sat in bags nearby, glinting in the lamplight like promises of a different future. "Before we begin," Cormack said, "I want to know about the children. Are they safe?" The question surprised Sam. There was genuine concern in Cormack's voice, not the calculated interest of a man protecting his investments. "They're safe. Sheriff Malloy has them under protection, along with Morrison and his accomplice." Cormack nodded, then gestured to the evidence spread before them. "Show me what you found." Sam began with the government documents, explaining how the mining operation had been established through a series of legal maneuvers that bypassed normal territorial law. The original Sanders family had been pressured to sell their surface rights, but had refused to give up their mineral claims. "So they were murdered," Cormack said, his voice flat. "The evidence suggests it. A convenient accident that eliminated the only people who knew the true value of what was buried under their land." Cormack studied a photograph Sam had found in the tunnels, a picture of government officials meeting with mining company representatives. "I recognize some of these men. They're not the type to leave loose ends, which is why they needed someone local to handle the dirty work," Sam continued. "Someone with a reputation for getting things done, no matter the cost. Someone like me. Someone exactly like you. But here's what they didn't count on." Sam pulled out the Sanders family's original land deed and mineral rights documentation. Eli and Clara are the legal heirs to everything. The sale their parents made was only for surface rights. The mineral rights were never transferred. Cormack's eyes widened as he grasped the implications. "Which means the entire mining operation is illegal. Worse than illegal. It's theft on a massive scale, backed by government officials who thought they could cover their tracks by eliminating witnesses." Sam watched Cormack's face carefully as the land baron processed this information. He could see the wheels turning, calculating risks and opportunities with the cold precision of a man who'd built an empire through careful planning and ruthless execution. "What do you want from me?" Cormack asked finally. "I want you to help me expose this conspiracy. In return, I'm offering you a legitimate partnership with the Sanders children. A 3-way split of the mining profits with proper legal documentation and federal oversight. And if I refuse?" Sam's voice hardened. "Then I take everything I found to the federal marshals, and you go down with the rest of them. Your choice, Cormack. Be part of the solution, or be part of the problem." Cormack was quiet for a long moment, staring at the evidence spread before him. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that Sam hadn't heard before. "You know, McCaid, I didn't start out as the villain in this story. 20 years ago, I came to Arizona Territory with nothing but ambition and a willingness to work harder than the next man. I built my empire one deal at a time, one risk at a time. What changed? Power corrupts, as they say. And the men in Washington, they made it clear that I could either work with them or be destroyed by them. I chose survival." Sam leaned forward. "And now? Now I'm tired of being their puppet." Cormack's eyes met Sam's with newfound resolve. "But if I do this, if I help you expose them, they'll come after me with everything they have." "They'll come after all of us," Sam agreed. "But we'll be ready for them." and we'll have something they don't expect. Which is? Sam gestured to the bags of gold. Proof of their corruption, documented evidence of their crimes, and enough money to hire the best lawyers in the country. Plus something else they've forgotten about. What's that? The power of ordinary people who've been pushed too far. The miners, the homesteaders, the small business owners, they're all tired of being squeezed by corrupt officials and land barons. Give them a leader they can trust and they'll follow him anywhere. Cormack smiled grimly. You're talking about a war, McCaid. I'm talking about justice. The war started when they murdered the Sanders family. We're just going to finish it. A sound outside made both men freeze. Footsteps on the wooden porch, too heavy to be casual passers-by. Sam blew out the lantern and drew his gun in one smooth motion, while Cormack's men took positions by the windows. McCaid. A voice called from outside. We know you're in there. Come out and maybe we'll let the children live. Sam recognized the voice. Deputy Harrison, the young man who'd been with Sheriff Malloy earlier. But there was something different about his tone, something that suggested he wasn't acting on the sheriff's orders. Looks like your government friends have more people on their payroll than we thought, Sam whispered to Cormack. Harrison's been acting strange lately, Cormack replied. More money than a deputy's salary should provide, new clothes, expensive horse. I should have seen it sooner. How many men does he have with him? Cormack peered through a broken window. 6, maybe 7. All armed, all positioned to cover the exits. Sam's mind raced through their options. They were outnumbered and surrounded, but they had advantages too. The church's thick adobe walls would stop most bullets, and there were enough hiding spots to make a prolonged fight costly for their attackers. McCaid. Harrison called again. You've got 1 minute to come out, or we start shooting up the sheriff's office. Those kids you're so worried about won't be safe much longer. The threat hit Sam like a physical blow. Eli and Clara were depending on him, and he'd led them into danger by underestimating how far their enemies would go. Cormack, he said quietly, I need to know right now. Are you with me or against me? The land baron checked his weapon and moved to a defensive position. I've made my choice, McCaid. Let's see if we can live long enough to regret it. Harrison, Sam called out, you want to talk? Then let's talk. But first, you're going to prove those children are safe. You're in no position to make demands. I'm in a position to expose every corrupt official from here to Washington. Unless you want your bosses reading about their crimes in newspapers across the country, you'll do exactly what I say. The silence that followed was tense with possibility. Sam could almost hear Harrison weighing his options, calculating risks and benefits with the desperate precision of a man who knew his life hung in the balance. Finally, Harrison's voice came back, less confident than before. What do you want? I want to see Sheriff Malloy and both children, alive and unharmed. Then we'll discuss terms. And if I refuse? Sam's voice carried the cold finality of a death sentence. Then this church becomes your tomb, and every newspaper in the territory gets a very interesting story about government corruption and murdered children. The standoff had begun, and Sam McCaid was betting everything on his ability to outthink, outfight, and outlast men who thought they could buy justice with blood money. But as he crouched in the darkness of the abandoned church, surrounded by enemies and fighting for the lives of 2 innocent children, Sam knew that some battles were worth dying for. The question was whether he was smart enough to win this one without paying that ultimate price. The standoff stretched through the long night hours, tension crackling in the desert air like electricity before a storm. Sam McCaid and Silas Cormack had turned the abandoned church into a fortress, using overturned pews and altar furniture to create defensive positions while Deputy Harrison's men maintained their perimeter outside. As dawn approached, Sam knew they couldn't wait much longer. Every hour that passed was another hour for Harrison's government contacts to bring in reinforcements or, worse, to eliminate the evidence by killing everyone who knew the truth. McCaid, Harrison's voice carried across the churchyard, hoarse from hours of shouting. "The sun's coming up. Time to end this." "Show me the children first," Sam called back. "I want to see them alive and unharmed." After a tense moment, two small figures were pushed into view near the church's front entrance. Eli and Clara Sanders stood hand in hand, their faces pale but defiant. Behind them, Sheriff Malloy appeared, his hands bound and a gun pressed to his back. "There's your proof," Harrison shouted. "Now come out, or they die." Sam felt his blood boil at the sight of the children in danger, but he forced himself to think strategically. Harrison was desperate, which made him dangerous but also predictable. Desperate men made mistakes, and Sam intended to exploit every one of them. "Cormack," he whispered, "I need you to create a distraction. Something big enough to draw their attention away from the children." "What do you have in mind?" Sam pointed to the bags of stolen gold. "How much do you think Harrison's government friends are paying him?" "Not enough to walk away from $50,000 in gold," Cormack replied with a grim smile. "That's what I'm counting on." Sam gathered several bags of gold nuggets and moved to the church's side window. "Harrison," he called out, "I've got a counteroffer for you. I'm listening. $50,000 in gold right here in the church. More money than you'll see in 10 lifetimes of government work." Sam could hear urgent whispers among Harrison's men. Greed was a powerful motivator, and he was betting that at least some of them would be more interested in immediate wealth than long-term loyalty to corrupt officials. "You're lying," Harrison shouted, but there was uncertainty in his voice. In response, Sam hurled one of the bags through the broken window. It hit the ground with a heavy thud, spilling golden nuggets across the dusty earth. The effect on Harrison's men was immediate. Several of them moved closer to examine the gold, their weapons lowering as avarice overcame caution. "There's plenty more where that came from," Sam called out. "Enough to set every man here up for life. But only if we can make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Harrison's voice was strained, caught between duty and desire. "Safe passage for the children and Sheriff Malloy, and I'll tell you where the rest of the gold is hidden." It was a lie, of course. The gold was right there in the church with them. But Sam was counting on Harrison's greed to cloud his judgment long enough for the next phase of his plan. Cormack caught on immediately. "There's a lot more than 50,000, he called out, adding his voice to the deception. "The main cache is hidden in the tunnels. Enough gold to buy a small country." The effect was electric. Sam could see Harrison's men breaking formation, some moving toward the spilled gold while others argued in heated whispers about what to do next. The careful discipline that had kept them in position was crumbling under the weight of their own greed. "Now," Sam whispered to Cormack. Both men burst from the church simultaneously, Sam heading for the children while Cormack laid down covering fire that sent Harrison's men diving for cover. The element of surprise gave them precious seconds, but Sam knew it wouldn't last long. He reached Eli and Clara just as Harrison spun around, his gun swinging toward the children. Sam's Colt .45 spoke first, the bullet catching Harrison in the shoulder and spinning him around. The corrupt deputy's shot went wide, shattering a church window instead of finding its intended target. "Get down," Sam shouted, pushing the children behind a stone marker as bullets began flying in earnest. Sheriff Malloy, his hands still bound, threw himself flat as Cormack's men engaged Harrison's remaining followers in a fierce gunfight. The churchyard became a battlefield, with muzzle flashes lighting up the pre-dawn darkness like deadly fireworks. Sam cut Malloy's bonds with his knife while keeping his gun trained on the surrounding chaos. "How many more are coming?" he asked the sheriff. Harrison said there was a federal marshal on the way from Phoenix, Malloy replied, rubbing his wrists where the ropes had chafed. "But I don't think he's working for the government, at least not the legitimate part of it. Then we need to end this before he arrives." Sam surveyed the battlefield with the tactical eye of a man who'd survived the Civil War. Harrison was wounded but still dangerous, crouched behind a water trough with two of his men. The others had either been hit or had fled when the shooting started, apparently deciding that no amount of gold was worth dying for. "Cormack," Sam called out, "can you get a clear shot at Harrison? Not without exposing myself to his men." Sam made a quick decision. "Cover me." Before anyone could stop him, Sam sprinted across the open ground toward Harrison's position, zigzagging to avoid the bullets that kicked up dust around his feet. It was a desperate gambit, but sometimes the most direct approach was the most effective. Harrison rose to meet him, his gun blazing, but his wounded shoulder threw off his aim. Sam's return fire was deadly accurate, catching the corrupt deputy center mass and dropping him like a stone. The remaining two men threw down their weapons immediately, their hands raised in surrender. The sudden silence that followed the gunfire was almost deafening. "Is everyone all right?" Sam called out, hurrying back to where the children waited. "We're okay," Eli said, his voice shaky but determined. "But Mr. McCaid, there's something you need to know. Before they brought us here, I heard Harrison talking to someone on the telegraph. He said the package would be delivered to Phoenix by noon today." Sam's blood ran cold. "What package?" "Us," Clara said in a small voice. "He was talking about selling us to bad men who would make sure we never told anyone about the gold." Full horror of what they'd been facing hit Sam like a physical blow. This hadn't just been about covering up corruption. It had been about human trafficking, about selling two innocent children to ensure their silence forever. "Not anymore," Sam said grimly. "Cormack, we need to get word to the real federal authorities, the legitimate ones." "Already taken care of," Cormack replied, producing a telegraph form from his pocket. "I sent a message to an old friend in the territorial government last night, someone I trust completely. He should be arriving with real federal marshals sometime this morning." As if summoned by his words, the sound of approaching horses echoed across the desert. But this time, the riders carried official badges and the authority of legitimate law enforcement. Marshal James Crawford was a man Sam recognized by reputation, honest, incorruptible, and absolutely ruthless when it came to bringing criminals to justice. His arrival meant that the nightmare was finally over. "Mr. McCaid," Crawford said as he dismounted, "I understand you have some evidence of federal crimes to present." "More than evidence," Sam replied. "I have confessions, documents, stolen gold, and two children who can testify to kidnapping and attempted murder." Crawford's expression grew grimmer as Sam laid out the full scope of the conspiracy. When he finished, the marshal was quiet for a long moment. "This goes deeper than we suspected," Crawford said finally. "We've been investigating irregularities in territorial mining claims for months, but we never imagined it went this high." "What happens now?" Eli asked. Crawford knelt down to meet the boy's eyes. "Now you and your sister get justice. And you get what's rightfully yours, the land and the gold that your parents died protecting." 6 months later, Sam McCaid stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt Sanders farmhouse, watching Eli and Clara play in their mother's restored flower garden. The corruption investigation had reached all the way to Washington, bringing down a network of officials who had thought themselves untouchable. Silas Cormack had proven to be a man of his word, using his resources to help rebuild not just the Sanders farm, but much of Tombstone itself. The three-way partnership had made them all wealthy, but more importantly, it had brought justice to a family that had suffered too much for too long. "You thinking about moving on?" Cormack asked, joining Sam on the porch. Sam looked out at the desert horizon, then back at the children who had changed his life forever. "Maybe someday, but not yet. These kids still need someone looking out for them. And Tombstone could use a sheriff who can't be bought." Sam smiled, touching the badge that Marshal Crawford had pinned to his vest just that morning. "Sheriff Sam McCaid. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it?" As the sun set over Arizona territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Sam McCaid reflected on the price of justice and the value of doing what's right. Sometimes the greatest fortunes weren't measured in gold, but in the lives you saved and the futures you protected. And sometimes, a lonely cowboy found that the greatest treasure of all was a place to call home. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.